So we're doing something a little different on the podcast today. In this episode, I'm interviewing a therapist who I really respect. Someone who I know really skillfully unpacks what growth actually requires and how therapy genuinely fits in on that path. And I want to be really clear about something up front for this episode, because I talk a lot about therapy on this show. But the thing is, I don't believe that therapy is a cure-all. And neither does my guest today, who is actually a therapist herself. But when you are willing to show up honestly to it, when you're willing to do the work in it and in your own life, therapy can help you see your patterns more clearly, especially the ones that show up in relationships and especially in relationship conflicts. And so I really wanted to make this episode as an invitation to reimagine what's possible and what it takes to actually make therapy work for you. As part of it, you're going to hear some of my own personal experiences in therapy, right? The times that I got called into places that I didn't want to go. And you're going to see or hear what that looks like in practice. What it looks like to stop performing and start really changing these patterns from the root up. And one more thing I want to name because it matters and it's echoed by my guest in this conversation too. Beyond therapy, we need community. Men especially need community to grow. And not just any kind of community, not just your friends and family, but spaces where vulnerability, accountability, and growth are normal, are the glue, right? And that's why I run men's groups. It's why I run my programs. It's not as a replacement for therapy, but it's also not something that therapy can replace. So here's the question we're really exploring today. If you're someone who values growth, if you want to become a more fulfilled and steady and present version of yourself, what role does therapy actually play? And what does it require from you to help you really thrive in your life or your relationship? So if you've ever wondered whether therapy could help you or why it didn't in the past, this conversation might shift the way you see the whole thing. So stay with me. This is Reclaiming the Gentle Man, a special interview with therapist Leila Gail. Leila Gail, welcome to Reclaiming the Gentle Man. It's so good to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited to be here.
So we met at an opening party for the therapy collective that you are a part of. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show, first of all, was because we connected pretty strongly over this idea of reclaiming. For you, it was about reclaiming belonging. And for me, it's very much about reclaiming masculinity. Reclaiming the Gentle Man's the name of the show, obviously. But the other part of it is it's a pretty special thing when you're in a group of people that you don't know and you find someone who you can actually get to a deeper level with. And would just very excited to have you here joining the podcast. The show recently, we've focused a lot on the benefits of therapy. One of the things that's been a huge part of my journey in becoming the man I am, the husband I am, has been therapy. And I think in almost every episode, I make some kind of plug for it. But I'm not a therapist. And in the past, when we've spoken, you've been able to really untangle a lot of the concepts that men struggle with, especially in relationship. So was really hoping to have you on today to kind of unpack these things a little bit more, but just add some depth and add some of that professional insight and wisdom that you've gained in your career. So maybe to kick it off with, I guess, could you just share a little bit about some of the people you love working with and some of the concepts that we've talked about in the past that, maybe you wanted to talk about most today on the show?
Okay. Well, I think to start, I really am very passionate about working with people who are seeking change. So it's individuals who, in some capacity, know that there's something better out there and they are trying to get there. They're trying to make these changes, these adjustments with themselves, with their life, with their relationships, and they are kind of struggling to reach that area of growth that they're seeking. And that's kind of, I think, where I come in as a therapist and just guiding them into a different direction to sort of identify not just what they're looking for, but also how they're getting there and what might be standing in the way from them making those transformations possible. So those are the types of people I really gravitate towards. I think those are the ones that I work best with because they're seeking. They're looking to find something within themselves that needs to shift.
Yeah. And you use the word growth, which is one of my highest values. I think it's a really helpful value to have, especially in relationship. It's one of the things that when specifically mentioned, when specifically thought of as an intention for life, an intention for a relationship, brings just a whole new level of clarity sometimes, but also brings on the, oh, now I have to actually look at that stuff. And in my experience, in my work, especially in the coaching world, therapy kind of gets a bad rap. A lot of people have this story about therapy not working for them, about having bad experiences with therapy. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to that, if a man is listening who maybe has tried therapy once in the past and it hasn't worked for him, or who's just kind of skeptical about the whole idea. What might you say to him?
I would say I'm skeptical too, and I'm a therapist. So I think that this is a very common experience that people have had sort of a negative interaction, a negative connection. Maybe someone who didn't push them hard enough or pushed them too hard, too quickly, or the rapport wasn't there. So I think the most important thing, first and foremost, is therapeutic connection. Connection is so, so important for us as human beings. We have to find connection. And if we're not connected to the person who's trying to guide us into something new, probably not going to work very well. And so it's okay to seek that out, to find someone that you feel a connection with, that there's something binding that relationship together because it is a relationship in a therapeutic setting or even a coaching setting, right? It's you have to kind of connect with the person and like them and have some level of sort of input that you're taking from them. And if that connection doesn't exist, it's going to be a barrier for rapport building. So I think what I would say is find someone that you like. And if you don't like them, keep looking. And it's okay to say, you know what, this isn't a great fit. Let me find somebody who is.
In my experience and in my work, I focus a lot on being able to work with a lot of sensation in the body. So what does it feel like to feel like you can't be vulnerable in a space? You can't be real when you're being called into like, hey, let's talk about the hard stuff. There's either a numbness, kind of a shutdown that happens, or just a total overwhelm. And it's often kind of a sequence of those two things. How do you recommend that a guy start to recognize that pattern that he's in, where it's like overwhelm starts to creep up, a lot of sensation, and then shutdown, numbness, checked out, that kind of thing?
I think there's two things that really have to happen. Is we have to be really patient with the process because we have to be able to see it. We have to observe it to be able to label it and to understand it. And so the patience is required because I think from in that therapy setting is we have to allow for the expression to exist. And this so often gets squashed, right? Because we see escalation of emotion or we see someone being triggered or being upset or being angry or being vocal about that, and we interrupt the process. And of course, there are times where we need to do that, right? However, I think it's important to allow that to transpire so that we have a good picture of what that looks like. Then we can go back. So we have to be patient and then we have to be curious. What just happened? Did you recognize that? What did that feel like? Because this is what I heard. What did you hear? What did you feel? What was that experience like in your body? What was that experience like in your emotions? And it sounds so basic, but when someone is activated in their own emotional responses, they are not aware until they are aware. And so part of it is bringing that awareness into the situation live and then to have them take ownership of it from their perspective, not my perspective, not their partner's perspective of just what just happened with you. What's going on? What does that feel like? What was the one that sort of activated that in the first place? And I think that that brings a heightened awareness that is really important for change.
Yeah. I'm smiling because you brought me back to an early session that I had in therapy where a huge kind of overwhelm, and I did my whole pattern. I went into a thing and then instantly started laughing or, whatever my habit was at the time. And my therapist said to me, "So what just happened?" And I was shocked by that. I said, "What do you mean what just happened? I don't want to look, don't make me look at that." Because I'm like literally trying to settle my system to get out of it. But when I kind of built that skill and got able to look at it, it was like a game changer because you start to notice when you're actually in the pattern versus just recovering automatically, because that's kind of what we're trained to do. And yeah.
I think the automatic response too is typically when I first start working with someone, right? And they don't have sort of that awareness yet. There tends to be a lot of projection of, "Oh, what just happened? Well, they made me mad." Hold on a second. Yes, okay, yes, you're angry by something that they did, but what happened with you? And that's a total shift. And for them to really take ownership of their reactions, of their feelings and their sensations, it's kind of a nuance, right? So they're not really used to doing that. So there's some training there that has to happen to really bring the perspective internal for them to understand that it's not necessarily just about what the other person did, because that tends to be the external focus and it's not productive. We don't make changes with another person. We have to start making changes within ourselves.
Which is, it's such a revolutionary concept when you really start to imbibe it. And I love that you brought in that concept of ownership because it can be a really tricky one for people. And a lot of the people I work with, a lot of people in this audience kind of resonate with the idea of being a people pleaser. And one of the kind of tricky, slippery things about being a people pleaser is you feel like you're owning everything. You feel like, oh, I'm responsible for their emotions. I have to be responsible for my reactions. But then when we do our process, when we do that whole system of getting triggered and then re-regulating, that projection thing comes up really quickly. Oh, well, they do this. And all of this resentment that's been boiling under the surface rises up. I'm curious how you approach that people-pleasing thing where we kind of reframe and figure out, like, what is actually mine? How do I parse out what I should be owning versus what's theirs and I need to let be theirs?
Well, I think this takes us back to our original conversation when we met, which is this concept of belonging, right? And innate human need is love and belonging. We have basic needs kind of at the bottom layer, and then we have safety and security that is necessary, and then we have love and belonging. And as human beings, we are wired for connection. So people pleasing is, in my opinion, a fear of belonging. And I have to change the way that I show up to feel like I belong and to feel like not just that I belong, but that you love me, just the way that I'm showing up. And so we learn really early on in wounding to show up differently, to show up in the way that pleases that person so that I can then mold myself into being what I think is acceptable. So there's a lot of pain there. And we have to address that it's not just, we can label it as people pleasing or it's codependency or enmeshment or yes, all of those things are true. But the underlying cause of that is a need to belong. So we have to look at where that pain is and why it's there and why you feel like you need to show up that way. Then you can start showing up differently.
Can you just poke into that a little bit more? Because I think that connection between I need to change myself for you to love me and there being
pain underlying that or fueling that might not be like a simple connection for people. Can you share a little bit more about either the origins of that pain or how you view it kind of from a therapeutic lens?
I think the wounding is in childhood. It's, we have big words that we use in therapy, and sometimes they're very aversive to people, right? Which kind of puts this barrier, or I don't want to participate in this, or oh, I don't have that, right? One of those words is trauma. And I think specifically when we're talking about love and belonging, we're talking about relational trauma. We're talking about some kind of attachment wounding of there was something that created a lack of security and relationship, a lack of security and attachment and acceptance. And that is a trauma. That is something that wounded. And so we have to reframe what this concept of trauma is. Relational trauma is just a wounding in relationship. So I have pain in relationship based in childhood, and so it sort of set in motion a new operating system. And we have to go find what that operating system is if we're going to try to reprogram it. And we can do that because our nervous system wants to be reprogrammed in a positive, joyous, connected way, but it's very protective. And so those reactions that we create in childhood based on this original relational wound sets off programming. And so we have to update it. We have to sort of upgrade it. And that's kind of when I think of therapy and when we're doing relational healing, we're reprogramming. We're just upgrading the system of, you know what, that worked when you needed it when you were 5 and 6. That doesn't work anymore. So the way that you're showing up, it's not serving you. It's actually not causing good things. And it's creating damage and a lot more pain. And so that sometimes it's really scary to go back and look at those things, right? And I see a lot of resistance, especially with the men that I work with, in identifying family of origin wounding. There's a lot of protection there. I don't know if it's shame, if it's fear, maybe a combination of all of the above. But there's a resistance of, I don't want to look at my family of origin. I don't want to look at what happened when I was a child. Everything was fine. This is about this current relationship. This is about my partner. And my answer to that is no, it's not.
No. Yeah. It really resonates with me, and that resistance feels so important. It's funny when a lot of the men I work with come with a similar story, and really I notice a lot of wanting to give credit to fathers, to mothers, to family. They did so good. I had it so good, especially compared, right? And there's this whole thing about comparative trauma that, boy, we could do a whole thing on comparing trauma because it really doesn't serve anyone. But I do notice that like people will tell these stories about their parents and either say like, oh, but they were doing the best they could, or, and he's so amazing, or, he was just such a good guy. I was so lucky. And a huge part of my own story was finally recognizing like, oh, I'm kind of mad about that. And just letting that happen, like unlocked everything for me. It was just this door that was sealed so shut.
And that's oftentimes where people who are not ready for the change and the growth will bolt, right? I'm like, nope, not ready for that, not going there. And so we have to be pretty gentle with that process. We have to be patient and curious with that process. I'll kind of interject those words again. Patience and curiosity is really, really valuable at this stage. But I love what you just said of we do that recognition in that moment where you allow yourself to say, I'm actually kind of pissed off about this. Like, yeah, that kind of sucked. I didn't like that. That hurt me. And that's the game changer, right? When you can give yourself permission to acknowledge that something hurt. And I think for men, in sort of when we're looking at healthy masculinity or wounded masculine, I think that this is something that happens in wounded masculine. It's a coping skill. It's a coping mechanism that in the short term is quite effective, of to be like, oh, everything's fine. Everything was great. I had a great upbringing. I had great parents. I had everything I needed. And then it stops there, but that's not the end. There's so much more underneath that. But it requires a lot of vulnerability. And wounded masculine is afraid of that vulnerability because it feels somehow exposing, or that they have to admit something that in that moment might feel like weakness. And vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is, in my opinion, strength. It takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable. But wounded pain tells us that that's us being weak and needy and complaining and blaming, and none of those things are really true. It's kind of the lies that our ego likes to tell us.
Yes, very much so. So this is great. I think kind of following along with this, when a man finally gets to this point of, I can admit that kind of hurt. A lot of men figure out they can do that. They figure out, oh, this kind of vulnerability isn't going to kill me, right? The threat response from that starts to diminish. But the spaces where he does that feel so small, so limited, and are often confined just to relationships. And a lot of women, in my experience, really struggle with being the only place that can hold his vulnerability. The only place where he goes to kind of finally say, oh, that hurt. And it starts to become a problem. I've been posting more about the power of having a men's group, the importance of having a men's group, a circle where you can go and actually be supported in that way, which is, especially in a group of men, it's like kind of revolutionary. It's really amazing. And that's the thing. I'm finding that so many women are feeling like, well, you're doing the work that I've been doing with this guy, but he's only doing it here. He won't see a therapist with me. He doesn't have access to groups like this. Is that something you see in your practice as well? And what do you recommend that a woman, because there are about half the people listening to the show are actually women, that a woman does when she's noticing like, he's got the vulnerability thing, but it's really just with me and it's becoming a little bit too much to hold?
I think that actually happens a lot, where when there's that safety in the relationship, that person kind of becomes the all and all kind of person to hold space for safety to exist in the relationship, right? Where I can tell you this, but I can't tell anyone else. And I think that women have to start being honest about the challenge that poses for them, because some of it is quite, I hesitate to use the word burden, but some of it is, because it's holding space for something that comes up in the relationship. But I think the other person really needs to take ownership that it's not just that relationship, it's all of the other things as well. And sometimes that can be really hard, because then it turns into not just holding space for that, but then it turns into problem solving and advice giving and secret keeping. And I don't think that that's really a fair relational dynamic, regardless of whether it's the male or the female. There has to be an outlet outside of that relationship for expression. And the other part of it, and this is where I think it can be most detrimental in romantic relationships, is that it doesn't allow that safe space to just exist for their partnership. To be able to say, hey, this is something that's bothering me about us. It becomes about, this is something that's bothering me about everything else. And it takes out some designated focus that I think can be really toxic. So having a brotherhood, or, just a tribe of people who are like-minded, who understand, who are on the same journey, who are wanting to grow, who are aligned to your own personal values. They can be completely different, but there's a journey of transformation that's happening. There also has to be a space where, say, if we're talking about men, for instance, right, and they have a problem, say, with their lady, they need to be able to go to their men and say, hey, help me out here, instead of going to their partner and constantly having sort of that dump without the perspective shift. And that's why I think, whether it's a therapeutic environment, whether it's a support group, whether it's a friend group, all of the above. I think all of those things are actually really important. Be able to process it before we regurgitate it. And that processing happens outside.
It's kind of the same skill, right? We're talking about, can I be real about what's happening for me, about what hurt for me? The best advice I was ever able to give around this was just trust. Trust if you feel like you're in a space where that can hold, that can support you, that can be there for you in the way that you think you might need. Trust. Let go. But I'm sure there are way better tools and ways in. If you were to find yourself in a space, maybe it's just a conversation with a friend who has the level of emotional intelligence that you admire, or a mentor. If a man is in that space, do you have advice? Do you have some mantra even that he could go to finally let that wall down? If he's feeling the call, if he's like, oh, I think this person could handle this,
I think the biggest thing is just try.
Hmm.
The response that I get is, well, I don't know. I don't know if I can do that, or I don't know how I feel, or I don't know what's going on. And we'll just try. Take a guess. Just venture in. It's just start. Start somewhere. Change is not going to happen without beginning somewhere. And we all begin as beginners. And so we're not looking for perfection in the process. It's about progress in the process. So it's progress, not perfection. That would maybe be my mantra here. It's just move in a direction, and it will take you there. It will take you there, maybe slowly, maybe quickly. That's really dependent on the individual person. But I think I'm going to say courage. Is find the courage. And courage is not the absence of fear. It's not the absence of fear. It's facing fear and doing it anyways. I'm going to be scared, and I'm going to acknowledge how scared I am, and I'm going to do it anyways. And being very intentional about creating bonds and connections that facilitate that, where that kind of growth can be cultivated.
Yeah. Which requires a whole lot of discernment.
Yeah, it's like an identity reconstruction.
Yeah, which is scary as heck.
Yeah. It is scary. It feels like it's a crisis. We even label it that way. I actually had a session with a couple that I've been working with about sort of this concept of an existential crisis. And we reframed it in session that it shouldn't really be labeled a crisis, because a crisis freaks us out, right? It feels like chaos and, oh man, I'm in crisis, right? That doesn't seem very hopeful. That seems desperate. That it's an existential transformation. It's an existential transition. I am transitioning to a different part of myself. And who's along with me? Who's on this journey and this path with me that can help me not be in crisis, not look at me like I'm in crisis, but look at me that I am in transition and you are helping me. And we have to find people who can help us through that. That I think is so essential. And I think this goes back to something that you were mentioning before, the importance of men's groups and connections, and having other relationships that support growth. We can't do it alone. It's so much easier when we have people in our corner who can be like, yeah, you kind of screwed that up, but you know what? It's okay. I love you anyways, and it's going to be all right. We have to have people in our life that can be real with us, that can also hold us accountable. And not this, surface level kind of support where we just, yeah, you're okay, you're fine.
I'm here if you need me.
All of the time. Exactly. Yeah. It has to kind of say, hey, you kind of screwed up there. Or, hey, maybe it's not okay to talk like that. Or maybe you did kind of like cross a boundary. Or maybe you are kind of being a jerk. Or maybe you're stuck in your own shit right now. Like you need to kind of take a look at that. I love you, man, and you can do better.
And to be able, to bring in the concept of accountability is so important. It's something I wanted to talk about too. And you were saying that piece about we are not our behaviors, right?
Mm-hmm.
100% we're not our behaviors, and we also need to be accountable for our behaviors. And so if we can hold both, right? If we can hold our perfectly imperfect identity, our sometimes troubling or hurtful behavior, and be accountable, it's kind of like the recipe for growth. Those are really important skills to develop, but we don't start with that. And most of us don't learn things like that. We're kind of over-indexed on the, oh, I'll just make sure my behavior is perfect. Or we're over-indexed on the, oh, I'll just be accountable for everyone's stuff. Or I'll just be the one who polices everyone's stuff, right? But to really kind of have those clear delineations, and it's kind of found in inner knowing that can be developed, right? It can be built, but to really know I'm lovable for who I am, perfect and imperfect. My actions affect other people, but they don't make me good or bad. And I can be accountable for what I do if I hurt someone. That to me feels like the formula. Would you add anything to that? I'm kind of putting you on the spot. We're coming up
I
with this.
would.
Yeah.
I would add, what came to my mind instantly was we have the ability to change. We have the ability to change. So often we hear, oh, people don't change. People don't really change. Yes, they do. And if you don't, you're choosing not to. That is a choice too. Stagnancy is a choice. Change is a choice too. So if we're choosing to stay stuck in something, it's a choice, whether it's conscious or unconscious, it doesn't really matter. But when we hold on to that, to say, oh, well, this is just how I am, or, oh, this is just what happened, that is destructive. Change is absolutely 100% possible. I watch it happen every day. And it's so beautiful when someone puts their mind to something and say, wow, let's take anger and aggression as an example here. Somebody's like, man, I want to be calmer, and I want to be kinder, and I want to be less explosive, and I want to be more mindful about what the choice of words that I use, and they put their mind to change. They change. They become more kind. They become more gentle. They become more well-spoken. They become more mindful. They become more patient. They become more controlled. They can become more regulated. So change is possible. The first step, though, is we have to identify what it is that we're trying to change and what it is that doesn't really fit. And to say, you know what, I really don't like behaving this way. And so I want to show up differently. How do I do that? Why do I keep doing that? And that's the exploration that I help with, right? Is it's not necessarily what's happening, what are you doing? It's why. It's how. And that's deeper work, right? That does require a little bit of investigation and a little bit of psychoanalysis. And that's where therapy, I think, is so valuable, is because we do offer a little bit more insight and training and objectivity to say, hey, I see something that you might not see. And then I can go into, okay, you know what you're doing. Now let's figure out why and how that's showing up, because then you can really start to shift into a different part of yourself that you feel really, really great about. And you can also have a lot of compassion for that other part, the part that shows up wounded, aggressive, defensive, protective, all of those things. It's not about shaming that part of ourselves. It's about accepting and embracing and being really compassionate and saying, okay, I understand why. But you know what? Let's not do that. Let's do this differently. That's what keeps me going. That's the work that I am just most proud of and most passionate about. And it's just so rewarding to see people coming out on the other side of this and just being so excited about something that they were once in so much pain about.
Beautiful. I am so glad you added that piece about change. That's exactly it.
Yeah. Nobody wants to stay the same. We all want to evolve and grow and change and emerge into new parts and to show up better than we were before. So that concept, I think, needs to be revisited.
One of the things you and I really connected on was the idea of what it takes to commit, and what we're seeing kind of in the relationships in our professional orbit and I guess for me more so, even some personal orbit, is watching commitment be something that's really hard for a lot of men. There's this aversion to it. And maybe I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. Maybe what's at stake, what's happening there.
Well, commitment is such a complex word, right? I think we show up in commitment in lots of different ways, but I think where I start to see it sort of changing and shifting is that men are inherently afraid of the long-term commitment. So a little bit aversive to that, a little standoffish, a little questioning, a little overanalyzing, maybe being very afraid of sort of making that leap. But there's another part of it that I see a lot too, where it's the commitment is showing up in the vulnerability. It's the commitment towards really being seen, and that's sometimes the fear. And I think that they're linked. I think that when there is a fear of that long-term commitment, it's also a fear of, oh, well, if they really truly see me for who I am, they'll leave or they won't like me anymore. So that's heavy and that's a much deeper wounding, but there's that insecurity there. And I think that this kind of goes back to when we're talking about belonging, when we're talking about feeling lovable and feeling like I can show up just as myself with all my junk and all the good stuff too, right? But when we are insecure in that, and that goes back to attachment wounding, is secure attachment is very different. It's very confident, it's very accepting, it's very vulnerable, it's very authentic, it's very forgiving, it's very patient, it's very kind, it's very curious, all of those things. Insecure attachment becomes very avoidant, becomes very anxious, becomes very controlling, becomes very judgmental, becomes often very people pleasing, very deflective, but also very inauthentic. And so I think fear of commitment is insecurity in attachment. And we're seeing that a lot. So we have to go back to sort of again, back to the original insecure wound of how do we reconstruct that? And that's where we reclaim belonging of I belong and I can show up and I can be fully, truly seen. And I don't have to fear not being lovable because of that.
Can I poke in a little bit at this? Because I'm seeing more and more people choosing lives of solitude in a lot of ways. I'm not going to be in a relationship because I'm not ready. I haven't worked on myself enough. I'm curious your thoughts on, hey, can we do this attachment work while we're inside of a relationship?
Absolutely. I think it's essential to do it in a relationship. We can't heal relational wounds alone because they're dependent on other people, right? We can be just fine. I see this in people all the time and they're like, well, I'm doing so great. I'm single now and I'm thriving and I'm doing so amazing. I'm like, well, yeah, you're in a relationship with yourself. You can continue that, but you won't have connection with another person. Healing happens because of the dynamic of the connection. We're not triggered by ourselves. We're triggered by other people, right? So I don't know how I'm going to react by somebody's reaction because I only respond to myself. So I have to do that work with another person. And so it's essential to do that in relationship. And that's where the fear comes in of, oh, I'm not ready for a relationship until I'm fully healed. Well, you won't know what you need to heal until you're in a relationship because that's going to bring up so many other things. And so often we're also attracted to people that can bring us that healing, that remind us of that initial wounding, that trigger that man, they push our buttons. We don't need to run away from that. We actually need to lean into that and go, ooh, why is this so upsetting to me, right? And that's where the healing happens. I think true healing and the best healing happens together, not independently.
And I'm so glad I asked you that. I think as the rise of social media psychology has taken hold, people hear things like, oh, well, I'm an anxious attachment, or I'm a secure attachment, or whatever, and we feel like it's this fixed identity. And it just really doesn't serve people to hold on to things like that, because it makes us think there's this threshold where suddenly we're secure and all of our attachments and our partner never triggers us ever again. And I just, in my experience and from what I've seen in my learning, it just deepens. We're just keep peeling the onion layer after layer after layer, and things we think we have completely done, just there's a new dimension to it that suddenly we can experience because we've allowed ourselves to open up to it and to do that healing. So yeah, I love that take. We're not triggered by ourselves.
No, we're not. We're just fine, and we'll talk ourselves out of it even if we are, right? We're very good at that. So, the other thing when you're talking about social media and the impact that that has is, it's not that there's no benefit to it, because there certainly is great content out there, but the relationship is not there. And for real growth, I think it requires connection, and it requires going a little bit deeper and having a conversation. We can't have a conversation with our phone. We just can't do it. You can't have a conversation with a reel. All you're getting is a little bit of information, right? So it's kind of like putting a bunch of ingredients on the table and expecting a cake to be made. It's not going to just magically turn into a cake. You have to do the work, and you have to learn how to do that. And that's where the relationship, I think, is so important. The other part of this is for these attachment styles, attachment wounding doesn't go away. It's a part of who we are. It's a part of our lifetime of experiences. So this expectation that, oh yeah, I can just take a course and learn how to be securely attached is bogus. That's not the goal. The end goal is to not reject that part of ourselves. It's to integrate it. It's to learn how to work through it. It's to go, oh, this is where my anxiety shows up. And instead of being uber controlling or judgmental, I need to sit with that feeling, and I need to explore how to approach this differently. Avoidant attachment is the same thing. I get triggered and I just want to bolt out of there. Well, I need to learn how to sit with that and to go, ooh, yeah, I don't like that, and I'm not going anywhere. Or, ooh, I need a break. I need to regulate myself. When am I going to come back? Those triggers, those sensitivities, those vulnerabilities, they don't go away. We just have to learn how to deal with them differently and more effectively with the person that happens to be activating that. Right? And we don't do that alone.
Right. And your focus on belonging feels so poignant with that in mind, because I think our concept about this lack of belonging that seems pervasive these days is like, oh, well, it's not there. But there's more human beings in the world than there ever has been. There's more access to each other than there ever has been. Why do we feel so secluded? My sense is we're not really aware of what the risk of belonging, truly stepping into feeling belonging is. And it's all those things that you just talked about. It's, I need to reconcile the parts of me that are not things I'm super proud of, or that I have shunned away, or that I pretend don't exist, or that when they come up tends to drive the people who I grew up with away. So I'm so grateful to you for doing that work of kind of raising the stakes for what belonging means.
I think belonging is so closely related to love. If we kind of go back to that conceptualization of hierarchy of human needs, which most of us are somewhat familiar with, right? But it goes back to that concept. Love and belonging are not exclusive, and we can't really separate the two. So belonging doesn't happen without love, and love doesn't happen without connection, and connection doesn't happen without authenticity, because I think we have to show up to really be seen and heard to be accepted. And I think that why belonging is now sort of this really pervasive issue of lack. People really feel a lack of belonging or a lack of authenticity, whatever you want to call it. It's because we're not allowing ourselves to show up that way. We're doing these superficial connections, these superficial engagements, superficial conversations, superficial routines. Social media is a huge part of that, right? But again, we're not having conversations that are deep, that are real, that are raw, that are deep and meaningful and have tremendous value. So we have to start going deeper again and getting away from the surface level living. And that's where belonging will really start to to be cultivated.
Yeah. It does start inside with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much. This has been such a fun conversation. I love hearing you
That was my
really talk.
here today.
Yeah. Just every time you kind of dig a little bit deeper, it's like there's so much richness available, and just holding the perspective of we're here to grow. So thank you.
We're here to grow. Yeah. We want to thrive in our life. So that's kind of our goal, is to really create the kind of healing that allows us to do that.
Beautiful. Thank you. Where can listeners find you? How can they connect with you?
I am available through Connected, Seen, and Heard. All of my information can be found on the website. We have lots of other clinicians who are also very like-minded, that would be very happy to connect with people who are curious about making some of these changes.
Awesome. And we'll link to it in the show notes. It is a very cool collective.
Yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful group of individuals who are really, really just passionate about people with all of their experiences. And yeah, I'm really very proud to be a part of this group.
Well, thank you, Leila.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Reclaiming the Gentleman. If you want to get connected with Leila or her collective, Seen, Heard, Connected, follow the link in the show notes to learn more about them and find a therapist who might work for you. If you want to stay in touch with me and hear about my upcoming men's groups and programs, which will be ramping up in February, the best way you can do it is to get on my email list. Go to davelashansky.com and enter your email in any of the boxes, and you will stay informed as to what's happening with Reclaiming the Gentleman, my 21-day program, and my upcoming monthly men's circle memberships. These are some of the best, most impactful places where men who have entered them have come in feeling depressed, feeling alone, feeling really, truly, genuinely lost in life, and come away with community, clarity, and a whole lot more joy and presence. If you want to map the path to your next best iteration of life, these men's groups and or therapy might be a great place to start. You can connect with me on Instagram at Dave_Lashansky, and you can follow along this podcast. I'm coming out with new episodes every single week. If you want to hear more interviews like you heard today, let me know. Drop me an email, drop me a DM on Instagram. Let me know what you liked, what you appreciated about this episode. And yes, as every podcast says, please do rate and subscribe and leave a review if you can on the podcast platform that you listen to this show on. It really does help. Thank you. Have a beautiful rest of your day or night, wherever this might find you. I'll be back in a week.